Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to Digital Hammurabi. I am your host, Megan Lewis, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Annelise Baer, who is just generally all-round a super awesome person. If you're on Twitter, you should go and follow her for as long as we still have Twitter. Who knows? And if you're on TikTok, then I highly recommend her TikTok channel. I will put all of the information in the video description, but many educational, interesting, and amusing videos about Egypt will be coming your way if you do that. Annelise, hello. Thank you for joining me.
Hello. Very happy to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you. Before we get into it, would you mind just giving everyone a bit of background and maybe explaining how you got into the particular field you're in?
Oh boy, that's a great question. And how long do we have?
As long as you want.
I'm an archaeologist, and the thing I do that actually pays the bills is I also work in TV production. So I make TV shows, and I've had the opportunity to work on a number of archaeology and history-centric shows in the past, working on one right now. But as is the case in TV production, you work on a whole bunch of things. But yeah, so I exist in a weird and interesting liminal space between the academic and archaeological world and the world of television production, entertainment, and media. And then there's me smack in the middle. So I do a lot of different things, and I spend a lot of time online. And I think that brings us to today.
Perfect. Thank you. So we are going to talk about the Amarna period, which I think is probably one of the more well-known, ancient history is generally well known anyway, but the Amarna period specifically, I feel like gets talked about an awful lot because it's so interesting and we have so much information. So where would you like to start?
Oh boy. Yeah. So the Amarna period is just one of those things that I really enjoy. I can talk about it at length for, I don't know, just, yeah. Ask me about the Amarna period. I will talk about it. But it's one of those periods that you see a lot of chatter about, and people are endlessly fascinated about it because this is the period that brought us such exciting figures as Tutankamun and his crazy father Akhenaten and Nefertiti, who was also there, and everything in between. And so it's this wild and crazy time period where we know a lot about it, but we also don't know a lot. So there's still a lot of questions, and that's why the ongoing work and research that's being done at Amarna, the city formerly known as Akhenaten, and anybody and everybody who is just spending their time and their life's work trying to figure out what the heck this weird family was doing for this weird period of Egyptian history. It's just the best. And every year it seems like some new details are being teased out of the literal pieces, because everything was kind of smashed to fragments and teeny tiny bits and pieces, literally putting it back together, and also metaphorically. It's just super cool and it's super weird. And I think a lot of the new weirdness hasn't really been transmitted to the wider public audience, just because it's all the stuff that's being talked about in conferences and amongst other archaeologists as they're trying to figure out just what is all of this? What is it? What happened? What was going on? All of it.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think everyone, people know about Tutankhamun, and most people I think have heard of Akhenaten. They don't always realize there's a relationship between the two of them. So you said that Akhenaten is Tutankhamun's father. How do we know who his mother is? Did Tutankhamun kind of continue Akhenaten's monotheistic in inverted commas religion, or was he kind of a different thing?
Let's see. Oh gosh.
Sorry.
That's okay. I guess I'll start at the beginning, or try to answer the questions in order. So yes, Akhenaten is Tutankhamen's father. And this was something that was, known and figured based on existing historical information, and then has been confirmed in a couple of different ways in more recent years and decades. The most notable being a thing that I like to refer to as DNA testapalooza, which occurred in 2009. And then the results and stuff were published in, late 2009, early 2010. And that was a whole, like I said, DNA testapalooza, CT scanapalooza that was done on all of the known Amarna period mummies in Egypt. And so they got in there with minimally invasive methods to get samples from everybody, CT scanned everybody just to be like, okay, it is the 21st century. What can we learn about these people with all of this fancy new technology? And the study and the whole project was indeed headed up by Zahi Hawass. So it is important to take that with just a little bit of grain of salt. But the results were actually super interesting, and everything was widely published, published in reputable journals and everything. You can find the paper, it's out there. I think I have a link somewhere. And then, of course, there was tons and tons of coverage from National Geographic. And from that, they made a whole family tree, an Amarna family tree with everybody's DNA relationships. And Akhenaten, or the mummy, the bones, because he's definitely not a mummy anymore, just bones, of the gentleman who is believed to be Akhenaten, is indeed Tutankamun's father. We know it's Tutankhamun. He had his labels on him and everything. And then the interesting thing was that a female mummy, who is known as the younger lady, because she did not have any labels or any sort of identifying items on her when she was found, is, genetically speaking, Tutankhamun's mother. So whoever this woman is, that's the mom. That mom is not Nefertiti. So that's an important thing to note. We don't have Nefertiti's mummy. We don't have a mummy that has been positively identified as her. There's lots of speculation, lots of wild guesses and, theories and stuff like that. But
wasn't there something in the news? Isn't there a news release saying that, we found Nefertiti?
Oh my God, there's one every year. There's literally one every year. So no Nefertiti yet. But what we do have is the younger lady, who is, based on the most recent scholarship, it's most likely that she was one of Akhenaten's sisters. So I think the important thing to note for the Amarna period is that we need to just go straight into Game of Thrones land, because there's going to be a lot of keeping it within the family.
More or less than we see generally in Egyptian royal families?
Standard.
Okay.
Standard level. But for those who are unfamiliar with this sort of thing, that was the norm. And it was very, very, very normal and very, very common to keep it within the family, within royal families. So Akhenaten and the younger lady, who is very likely one of his sisters, they had little Tutankhamun, and he did his thing. But then Akhenaten and Nefertiti they were married, and she was the chief wife. So that's why she gets the position of importance and power during his lifetime and his reign.
You said briefly, when you started answering the question, you said that genetically speaking, the younger lady is Tutankhamun's mother. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that socially, maybe he would have been raised by Nefertiti to kind of, given that she was the great wife, to have it as a more of a coherent, what we might view as a family unit? Or socially, would that not have made a bit of a difference?
That's a great question. And that's something that I genuinely don't know. And I don't think anyone knows that either, just because we don't have a lot of information about the daily life or the sort of interpersonal dynamics of this family. We know from art, royal art, that Akhenaten and Nefertiti were power couple. They were presented as a power couple, and it seems like they did actually genuinely love each other as well. So that's really nice. And we know that they had 4 daughters, and that they loved their daughters so much. And that's something that's really cool about the art from this time period. So aside from the sort of, very sort of fluid, androgynous, gender everything style that really, gets the most attention for this time period and the art, what we also see in this art is something that we don't see anywhere else, is really sensitive, emotional displays in royal Egyptian art, because royal art up until this time period and after is very stylized. And even though there are ways of showing emotion and affection, they're very stiff and they are very stylized. And you kind of just have to know what you're looking for. And it really is as simple as so-and-so is depicted as, placing their hand on the shoulder of their spouse, indicating, thought and care. Yes, this is a perfect example. So this is essentially a family photo of Akhenaten, and he's holding and kissing one of his little daughters, and then the other 2 are playing on Nefertiti's lap. And we would never, ever see this amount of emotion and casualness in a family portrait of a royal family, no less. So this is super cool. And yeah, it should be noted, and I really want to emphasize it. They had such a, for all the weirdness that went on, they had a really sweet family and they loved their children so much. So everybody remember that.
Yeah. I think just having the children present
Yeah.
in royal art is not something I'm terribly familiar with. It certainly doesn't happen a whole bunch in Assyrian art, unless you've got like the king and his crown prince as war heroes kind of thing, but not small children.
Yeah, that's usually how you would see it. There would be sort of a formal presentation of an heir, that sort of thing, but this very informal setting of a family just sort of spending time together and being very affectionate with each other is very new. And I think just it's just really sweet. And again, really like all of his weirdness and all of his, problematic everything, they love their kids, they love their daughters. And there is a story that was learned from some of the existing art that was left behind, that one of the daughters did unfortunately die very young. I think, there was a fever that came through at some point. And so one of the daughters died, and like this tore the family apart. They were distraught, and they depicted that in the art in her tomb. So we can tell just how sad these, their parents, the parents who lost a child. So like, that's devastating. And they showed this in the art for all of us to find out afterwards. So I think that's a lot of the stuff that tends to get lost in the communication of the Amarna period to the wider public. They just focus on, Tutankamun, golden boy king and all the shiny things in his tomb, Akhenaten, super weird. And then we move on.
And I think for me, one of the really interesting facts about this like family depiction in art is that it's such a break from what we see in Egyptian art beforehand. So if this was super common, you could say, oh, it's the style of the time, it's what was expected, it's propaganda. But this is so very different that it feels like it's much more likely to actually be someone's emotional experience.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the things I think that's most interesting, and I learned this from a lecture that I attended via Zoom, months ago at this point. I think it was last year. I don't know. It's all a blur. Is that one of the reasons it seems, again, now based on, current scholarship and in-depth research and study of all of this, trying to figure out why, just why all of this, is that the presentation of both Akhenaten and Nefertiti as these sort of, again, weird, androgynous, I mean, it's like so beyond gender fluid beings, is because that was something that needed to happen to visually convey this new religion that Akhenaten was like 300% into. And that involved, getting rid of, or not like properly getting rid of. The average person was still, worshiping their many deities as they saw fit, because you can't get to everybody. The idea being that focus in the religion, the state religion, would be simply on the Aten, which was the sun disk, which meant that the usual selection of deities that represented the male and female and the sort of fertility balances that were needed to keep the universe going, standard Egyptian stuff. We needed to figure out how to depict that. So because the sun disk, the Aten, was the primary thing that everybody was supposed to be focusing on, Akhenaten needed both him and Nefertiti to be the presentation of those missing, male and female things that were needed again, to keep the universe going. So that's why, again, based on current scholarship and thinking, that's kind of the reasoning behind the strange shapes of everybody during this time period, which was such a break from the very stiff and stylized Egyptian art in every single previous dynasty and every dynasty afterwards. So yeah, it gets really, really weird when you start getting into the nitty gritty of Autonism and what was going on. And yeah, it's a lot more wild than I think most people think, just again, because this is all stuff that's being talked about at conferences, it's in papers, it hasn't quite, it's not like proven 100%. So that's why no one's writing books saying like, this is true because X, Y, and Z, because we're still working on proving that.
And I think, and this is probably an old idea, so I'd be interested to hear you're more up to date on this than I am. But when I went through my undergraduate degree, it was suggested during an Egyptian art history lecture that the reason Akhenaten's physical form is depicted so strangely is that it's actually because he had some kind of medical issue, and that he looked indeed the way that he is being depicted. Is there any truth or evidence behind that?
Nope. And that is based on, again, the bones, the physical remains of the gentleman who is thought to be Akhenaten. Again, I'm not calling this guy Akhenaten, even though like that'd be super great. Hence all the qualifiers. Totally normal bones, normal bone structure. I think what tomb is, I think he's KV 55. I think that's the tomb that this gentleman was found in. I hope there's a lot of tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and I do often get them mixed up, but somebody was found in KV 55. I think it was this guy. And in any case, based on the skeletal remains, everything is totally fine, totally normal, totally proportional, no congenital deformities or anything like that. I mean, what's actually really interesting is that, again, based on the CT scanapalooza of everybody, there were a lot of inherited issues that this whole family had. So everybody had scoliosis, for example. Tutankamun had it real bad. And there were, some other, like little things here and there, but nothing to an extreme degree that would indicate that the art style was reflecting the actual physical state of a human being. I mean, if anything, it was kind of, ancient art, as we all know, and royal art specifically in any time period is essentially Photoshop. Hey, I saw that guy last month. So it's a lovely statue. And I wish I had the document. I can find a link later that has all the, they made a beautiful chart with all of the results of all the CT scans and listed out everybody's, medical situations that they were able to identify. And, again, the worst that most people in this family had was scoliosis. And then poor Tutankhamun, who was the result of several generations of keeping it in the family. This poor child. Oh, that poor child had so many physical issues that it's amazing that he even lived to 18 or 19. Wow. And this poor kid must have been in some amount of chronic pain every single day of his life. So I have a lot of sympathy for Tutankhamun.
Yeah, it's a very sympathetic figure.
Yeah.
I think just...
Yeah, it's a very interesting story. And it's, even though his life was so short, and obviously his afterlife has had a much more interesting experience. His afterlife has had a whole life of its own. In his own life, he crammed a fair amount of stuff in there. And I think that to circle back, I guess, to one of the questions that you had, which was, did Akhenaten continue any of Akhenaten's religious reforms or anything like that? The answer is no, because by the time it got to him, and there's, again, based on a lot of current scholarship and research, there does appear to be a 1 to 2 year period between the death of Akhenaten and the sort of formal beginning of Tutankhamun's reign, where it seems very likely that Nefertiti reigned as pharaoh on her own. That's, I think, where we are currently thinking that the nice long name Neferuaten, I'm pretty sure that was her throne name, was for, because again, Tutankhamun being the son, he was only like 6 years old at the time. So, as was common in many, many other places around the world that had royalty and, a royal ruling class, if the regent was, say, under the age of 10, there would be a co-regent, there would be a whole slew of advisors that were sort of stepping in to rule and exist on the king's behalf until that king was of age. And so that's exactly what happened for Tutankhamun. So technically he did become pharaoh at I think 6, maybe 8 years old, which again, not exactly someone you would be trusting with matters of diplomacy or international relations or even internal relations. So Nefertiti, it seems, did get a chance to rule on her own for about 2 years. And there was still kind of like an Akhenaten fan club at the time. So there were still some people who were trying to keep it going. But for the most part, almost immediately, things started going back to the way it was. And I mean, the family packed up fairly quickly and moved from the magical new city Akhenaten back to Thebes, which was the old capital, and stuff started going back real quick. So
that was actually going to be my next question, if Nefertiti moved everyone back.
Yeah. They moved away from Akhenaten fairly quickly. And there does seem to be, there's a lot of questions still about this intermediary period afterwards, because all of the records of this specific reign and, this family were smashed to bits and pieces because people were like, let's pretend this never happened. And everything's fine.
And we'll all be fine. Yes, there's nothing.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
There's no city out in the desert. What on earth are you talking about?
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. Yes. Everything's fine. Don't look over there. Actually, just around the corner from that statue of Akhenaten in the Egyptian Museum, there is actually a statue of Tutankamun, and it's in this sort of cool, like, middle style. So it's got a hint of the Amarna style, but it's also heading very strongly back to the traditional style of making a colossal statue. And you can see on his belt buckle, he had a cartouche, and that had his name, but the end of it had actually been recarved. And so instead it says one of the names of Ramses II, because that's the kind of guy he was.
Yes, you do get that impression from Ramses II.
Yeah, he went and Ramsesed upon a lot of existing monuments. And like, again, that was super common. He just did it the best and the most. So that's why a lot of his stuff, his recarvings, are still around.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes before we start on audience questions. So audience, if you have questions, please do get them in. We'll get to as many as we can. I did want to ask, the Amarna period is a little heavy on the drama side of things.
Yes.
Is there a particular story or anecdote that you are more fond of maybe than others?
That's a good question. I mean, the whole thing is drama. I'd say I'll pick a handful of moments because I can't pick just one. Drama moment number one is that Akhenaten was never supposed to be pharaoh. He was actually the second son. His older brother was the crown prince, but older brother, whose name I forget, died. Again, probably an illness or a fever or something. And so then Akhenaten, who was then little Amenhotep IV, the weird kid who was not supposed to be king, became king. So here we
everyone
are.
kind of breathed a sigh of relief when they realized that actually the older son was much less weird than the second born, and then it just all went tits up, really.
Yes, absolutely. So the weird brother got to be king. So off to a strong start already. And then let's see, drama moment number two probably would have to be the fact that there was a period, because when Akhenaten was just like, to the existing priest class, the Amun priests, the existing advisors, and other nobles, he was just like, I'm gonna go make my own capital city. Bye. That city had to be built from scratch. So there was definitely a period of time where the royal palace was kind of like a mud hut while everything was being built. So I just found out about that at another lecture, I think like earlier this year. And just the mental image of that is hysterical to me. Just, again, just the pharaoh in
It's interesting that they don't wait for the city to be built before moving in.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably in such a hurry to like get his own thing going that he was just like, screw it, we're doing it. And that city was built fast, basically with the ancient equivalent of how quickly certain like malls and shopping plexes go up, very cheaply built, and suddenly, ta-da, it's a whole thing. But yeah, there was definitely a period of time where the royal buildings were basically mud huts. And then the drama afterwards with the death of Akhenaten. I think he was 40 something when he died. So, a little young, but who knows what was going on at the time. And then just the chaos afterwards. We think Nefertiti got to be pharaoh for like a year or two. And then, Tutankhamun takes over. And then everything moves. And then he dies way too soon. And then his half-sister wife, Akhenaten, is just like, what do I do? Help? Somebody, anybody, please send help. I don't know what's happening. And I'm like 18 and my husband has just died. What? And then just chaos afterwards. The entire, the country was basically bankrupt at that time because of Akhenaten. And then history moved on.
Wonderful, thank you. So there's a lot there for people if they're interested in going and finding out more.
Yes.
Yeah, the Amarna period is spectacular.
Yeah,
but we do have a few audience questions. Eric wants to know, did Hawas's involvement in the study some way compromise the results?
For this thing, because there were so many other people and institutes involved, I'm going to say no. He was basically spearheading the project because this is one of the areas that he really, really likes to focus on. It's got a lot of big names. So in this instance, I would say no. I've read the study that they published, and they were very thorough in their methodology, very clear when acknowledging when there were difficulties or issues with the data and the results that they obtained. So they state that very clearly. So in this case, I'd say it's pretty decent. And since it hasn't been done since, that's kind of what we have to go off of.
Do you think, so I don't really keep up with genetic testing in ancient history. Is it likely that they may go back and check the results, or is it kind of a one and done because of the risk to the remains?
It depends. I think, again, based on the latest stuff that I've heard, it's unlikely that Tutankhamun will be retested or rescanned just because of the incredibly poor quality of his and condition of his remains. And that's a big issue with a lot of these specific royal mummies, is that not all of them are in really good shape. In fact, a lot of them are in really, really bad shape. So there's really only so much you can get. And unless some element of the technology has some sort of crazy breakthrough that, opens up new possibilities or something like that, it's unlikely that, specifically in the case of Tutankhamun, it's unlikely that he will get retested or rescanned anytime soon, just because it's about as good as we're going to get based on the state of preservation.
Thank you. Luru asks, is it correct that Tutankhamun's mother belongs to mitochondrial haplogroup type K? I don't know what any of those words mean. Does it indicate something specific about her origin?
I don't think so. I also don't have the results of the study in front of me to confirm or deny that, but I know this is a talking point that can often lead to the exotic origins of, say, Nefertiti, for example. But again, from everything that I do remember, Tutankhamun's mother, who is the mummy that is called the younger lady, is Akhenaten's sister, his like full sister. So she was a part of that family. And as far as everything looks, they were all Egyptian. And that's kind of where that is.
Thank you. JS would like to know, have you personally worked on ancient aliens?
I have, yes. That was actually my very first job in television. It was not fun. It was very traumatic. And I can talk about it now because I've had a lot of therapy.
Therapy is a wonderful thing.
It really is. So yes, I have. It's on my resume. It's, not a secret or anything. Because it was 2000, let's see, finished my master's degree in 2008, was spat out into the world in the middle of a, global economic depression, and there were no jobs. So it took me a while to find something. And by the time I did get a job, Ancient Aliens was the only show that was doing anything remotely history
Historical.
oriented, and I got hired because I had a history background and I was good with computers.
Good reason to hire someone.
Yep.
Cody asks, besides scoliosis, do the other people in Tut's family tree show symptoms of genetic inbreeding?
Hi, Cody. And I think the question is, yes, they all have some interesting physical and congenital issues, every single one of them. Scoliosis was the main one that, appeared to be, the whole family tree. All of them had other issues. I don't remember the exact ones again because I don't have the thing in front of me. I should have pulled that up. But Tutankamun, for example, he had really gnarly scoliosis. He had a club foot, and he also had some pretty severe jaw issues as well. He had a really, really severe underbite. Overbite. So I can only imagine what kind of TMJ issues would have come with that, in addition to just other physical issues as well. So yeah, all of the family, the further down the tree you go, you start seeing more and more issues.
I can imagine. Ray asks, if the Amarna period was so prosperous, why did Akhenaten position himself in isolation from the old established trading centers?
Ooh, great question. So yeah, the Amarna period, it started off really well because Egypt was coming off of a very prosperous period at the beginning of the New Kingdom. So this all took place within the New Kingdom. There's Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. That's usually how ancient Egyptian history gets broken down. So the New Kingdom started off strong. Hatshepsut was one of the first ones up there, and she did such a great job that the rest of the period was flourishing until Akhenaten came along and was the example of why you should not let teenagers run countries, because weird things happen. And it wasn't that he was trying to position himself away from established trading centers. The trading centers still existed. His whole thing was he wanted to separate himself from the old capital, where the sort of, existing regime, and specifically the Amun priesthood, had a lot of their power and influence, because he wanted to make his religion, the focusing on the sun disk, Aten, the main thing, and he didn't want to deal with any of those annoying and pesky naysayers who wouldn't agree with him. And being the pharaoh and having absolute power, he just said, "I'm gonna make my own city. Bye-bye.
We're leaving now. Bye.
Yeah.
Have fun." Thank you. We are, I believe, out of audience questions.
Ooh.
So thank you so much for joining us. This was very interesting. I always enjoy talking about the Amarna period from a seriological point of view. It's fascinating because we have all of these great letters.
The letters are amazing.
We didn't even get to the Amarna letters. I know.
It's so good.
But I never know. I don't know enough about the Egyptian side of things. Mm-hmm. So I love hearing about what happened and all of the people. We do have one final question before I let you go. It should be relatively easy. Yes. How could Egyptian royalty survive for so long if there was this much incest that people were having significant health problems?
Well, I mean, it wasn't Charles II of Spain bad. Everyone was still upwardly mobile. They could talk, they could eat and drink, feed themselves. So there were physical issues, but big picture, everybody was more or less fine. And then dynasties would end, and someone else would take over. You could bring in a cousin to sort of mix things up a little bit. All sorts of things happened, and that's how royalty survived. I mean, they, I guess, to paraphrase or maybe directly quote Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way. They found a way. They made it work. Sometimes it wasn't exactly perfect, but they made it work.
They could pretend.
Yeah. And that was most pharaohs had multiple wives. There was the chief wife, who would have been the queen, and then there were also secondary and tertiary wives. So you had a little bit of variance. And again, sometimes a cousin could come in, and or sometimes someone outside the family, someone who was noble, could come in and help boost the gene pool a little bit as well.
And the Amarna period is good for that because you have all of these foreign princesses being sent to Pharaoh as like queens, supposedly. I don't know if they would have actually produced heirs, but they were there. So
yeah, they were there.
Some kind of genetic diversity, maybe.
Exactly, or an attempt was made.
Well, thank you so much, Annelise, for coming and talking to us. It was an absolute delight to hear about everything. Thank you, audience, for your wonderful questions, as always. And I don't think we have anything planned because I've been sick. So when I am finally better and not sounding like I don't know, I'm an old lady or smoke regularly, we will get some more interviews lined up. But until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that?
Digital Hammurabi is made possible by generous sponsorship from our patrons. Their support means that we have the technological and academic resources necessary to bring the ancient world directly to you. If you want to join the team, go to patreon.com/digitalhammurabi to see how you can help.